I used to believe that if you gave everything to your child, your love, your time, your last dollar, they'd carry that love forward. They'd protect you when your bones got weak, when your hands stopped working right. But life has a cruel way of showing you who really sees you and who just uses you. My name is Bertha Holloway, and this is not a revenge story. It's a story about a woman who gave everything and learned the hardest way that not all love is returned. The morning it all started, I couldn't even button my blouse. My hands just wouldn't cooperate. Swollen, stiff, useless. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor like it owed me something. Even holding a teacup had become a delicate operation, and more than once lately I'd watched one slip from my grip and shatter on the kitchen tile. It had been raining for 2 days straight in White House. The kind of slow, bitter rain that seeps into the walls of your bones no matter how warm your house is. I kept the heater on, but arthritis laughs at things like central air and good intentions. And in those quiet, gray hours before dawn, when everything feels a little more fragile, I realized something. I couldn't do this alone anymore. I was 68, widowed, and had been living on my own ever since Mitch moved out for college. Back then, he promised me he'd visit every Sunday. "Just you wait, Mom. I'll be back every weekend for your cooking." That first year, he called every other week, then once a month, and then, well, you know how that goes. But I never stopped loving him, never stopped showing up. That's what mothers do, especially mothers like me who built their lives around their children like scaffolding. When his wife was on bed rest with their first baby, I moved in for 2 months to take care of the house. When they couldn't make the mortgage 1 year, I dipped into my emergency fund and wrote the check. No questions asked. I always believed that sacrifices meant something, that one day when I couldn't walk as far or cook as much or reach the top shelf without help, Mitch would remember everything I'd done, not because he owed me, but because he loved me. I held on to that belief like it was a family heirloom. That day, I had an appointment with Dr. Elma Radley, my rheumatologist. I'd been seeing her once a month, each visit ending with a prescription for stronger pills and a softer smile. "You're doing great, Bertha," she'd say. "Keep your spirits up." But this time was different. The bus ride into the city was miserable, windy, wet, loud. I wrapped myself in my old wool coat, the one with a tear in the pocket I never got around to sewing, and sat by the window, pretending not to notice how young everyone else looked. I always feel older at the hospital, like I don't belong, even though I'm exactly where I should be. The waiting room was the same as always, antiseptic, beige, lined with old magazines nobody reads. A nurse called my name and I shuffled in behind her, slow but determined. Dr. Radley didn't waste time. "Bertha," she said, flipping through my chart, "I won't lie. Your arthritis is progressing faster than we hoped." I nodded. I already knew that. "There's a new treatment. Biological therapy, much more effective. Slows the disease, not just the pain. I've seen patients return to full mobility after just a few months." "That sounds miraculous," I whispered, fingers cradling the glossy brochure. "It is," she said, "but it's expensive." That word, expensive, it lingered in the air like smoke. My insurance would barely cover a fraction. The total cost? $20,000. I felt the ground shift beneath me. I had $15,000 saved, money I'd set aside slowly over decades, never touching it unless I absolutely had to. I called it my stormy day fund, and this was a storm. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table, the brochure spread in front of me, next to my mother's old teacup. I'd already ruled out a loan. What bank gives money to a widow on Social Security? Selling the house? At my age, moving wasn't just hard, it was unthinkable. There was only one person left to ask. That evening, I picked up the phone and dialed Mitch. His wife Cordelia answered. She was warm as always, busy as ever. "I'll tell him to call you, Bertha. Better yet, why don't you come by for dinner?" Her house was loud and alive. Zoe playing music too loud, Flynn yelling at some game, Cordelia moving from stove to sink to laptop with the grace of a woman who was used to doing too much at once. And there in the corner was Mitch. My boy, my baby. Now 42, hair graying slightly, slouched in a chair with a beer in hand, eyes half closed from work, and whatever else life had dulled in him. We finally got a moment alone. When I told him about the treatment, about the pain, about how scared I was of losing my hands completely, he didn't interrupt. He just listened. And then, like it was the simplest thing in the world, he said, "Let's open a joint account, Mom. I'll add the $5,000. That way it's easier to manage. I'll take care of everything. You don't have to worry about a thing." My heart almost broke from relief. Was this it? Was this finally the moment the care flowed back in my direction? I wanted to believe. I needed to believe. So I said yes. The next morning, we went to the bank. We filled out forms, confirmed IDs, and transferred the entire $15,000 to an account under his name. He smiled and kissed my forehead. "Don't worry, Mom. I've got you." And for a moment, I let myself feel safe. That was my mistake. I didn't know it then, but the moment I handed over that money, I also handed over the last piece of trust I had left to give. The first 2 days after we opened the joint account, I felt a strange kind of peace, the kind you get after making a hard decision and convincing yourself it was the right one. My body still ached, of course it did, but inside, I was warm, taken care of, or at least I thought I was. I kept glancing at the brochure on the counter, imagining myself walking through a garden without needing a cane, baking cookies with Zoe without my hands trembling. It sounds small, I know, but when you live with pain long enough, you start dreaming in simple joys. On the third day, I called the clinic to schedule the first round of treatment. They were kind and upbeat and said all they needed was confirmation of payment. "No problem," I said. "My son is taking care of it." And I meant it. That night, I called Mitch, straight to voicemail. I waited a few hours, then tried again. Still nothing. So I texted, "Hey, honey, clinic needs payment confirmation to start treatment. Could you handle that today?" No reply. The next morning, still no call, no text. I called Cordelia, no answer. It didn't feel like worry yet, just annoyance. The kind only mothers get, where part of you wants to scold and part of you wants to forgive before anything's even happened. But then came the moment I still replay in my mind like a slow-motion nightmare. I opened Facebook. Cordelia had posted photos, dozens of them. There was Mitch, my son, holding a bright drink in a coconut shell, sunglasses on, grinning ear to ear. The caption, "Much-needed family getaway in paradise now Bahamas bliss." My hand froze on the mouse. I stared at the screen, not blinking. I clicked through each photo, hoping, praying that this was a mistake, that maybe they'd gone months ago and were just posting now. But no. The photos were dated yesterday, poolside dinners, jet skis, ocean views. I stared at one image where Flynn was burying his dad in the sand. Mitch was laughing so hard his face was red, the same face that had smiled at me 2 days earlier in the bank, the same lips that kissed my forehead and said, "I've got you." I felt my chest go tight. The phone trembled in my hand as I called him again. This time he picked up. "Hey, Mom?" There was music and waves in the background, people laughing. "Mitch," I tried to keep my voice steady. "Are you on vacation?" "Oh, yeah. You saw the photos?" I couldn't even form a sentence. "What about the clinic?" I managed. There was a pause. "We'll talk about it when I get back, okay? Now's not a great time." He sounded irritated, like I was interrupting his massage. "Mitch," I whispered. "You spent the money." Another pause, then a cold, flat voice. "Mom, I'm tired of you always making things dramatic. You're not dying. Your joints will hurt a while. Big deal." I sat there, stunned. My heart pounded in my ears. The doctor said, "Doctors always exaggerate. You've lived a long life. You'll be fine." But Mitch, that was my savings, for my treatment, for a chance at a normal life. "You know what?" he snapped. "I can't do this right now. I'm on vacation. We'll talk when I get back." Then he hung up, just like that. I didn't cry right away. I sat at the table, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the kitchen. I looked out at the rain falling steadily through the back window, And then, slowly, the tears came. Not dramatic sobbing, no. These were slow, steady, grown woman tears, the kind that come from knowing someone you raised, someone you gave your life to, has turned his back on you. I want to pause here for a moment. To you, listening right now, have you ever had someone you love look at your pain and decide it just wasn't their problem? Have you ever sacrificed for someone only to be told you're a burden? If you have, I want you to know this: you're not alone, and you're not weak for feeling the way you do. Sometimes the hardest thing is not the betrayal itself, but realizing you were never seen the way you thought you were. I didn't open the curtains for 3 days. I ignored calls. I didn't eat much. The house felt heavier than ever, filled with shadows I couldn't explain. And the pain in my joints? It got worse, but strangely, I hardly noticed, because my heart was hurting more. On the 4th day, someone knocked. I didn't answer at first, but the knocking kept coming. Firm, familiar. It was Enid. My best friend for over 40 years. She didn't wait for an invitation. She came in, carrying groceries and shaking rain off her coat like she owned the place. Good Lord, Bertha, you look like hell. She wasn't the sugar-coating type. She poured tea, sliced some bread, and didn't say a word until I finally broke. I told her everything. The clinic, the money, Mitch, the photos, the words. You're not dying. Enid's eyes went sharp and cold. You know, she said, her voice quiet but full of fire, that boy never appreciated you. He always took, never gave, and you never saw it because you were too busy giving him everything. I wanted to defend him, truly, but I couldn't find the words because I knew she was right. That night, I stared at the ceiling and thought back to a memory I hadn't visited in years. Mitch was 14. I'd saved for months to buy a new washing machine. The old one shook like it was possessed. But Mitch begged me for a guitar, said he wanted to start a band. I bought the guitar. The washing machine broke down 2 weeks later. I washed clothes by hand for almost a year after that. And the guitar? It collected dust in a closet. Suddenly, I saw it all clearly. Not just this betrayal, but every small one. Every time I bent and he didn't notice. Every time I sacrificed and he assumed that's just what mothers do. And maybe it is, but maybe it shouldn't be. There's a particular kind of silence that fills a house when your child betrays you. It's not just quiet, it hums. It lingers in the corners of each room, like smoke that doesn't know how to leave. I didn't open the blinds for 4 days. The kitchen stayed dark, the stove stayed cold. The chair by the window, where I used to knit or sip tea, sat untouched. I had no one to talk to, no appetite, no energy. And still, no call from Mitch. The pain in my joints came back with a vengeance. I could barely close my hands into fists. I dropped a glass trying to pour water and just watched it shatter. I didn't even flinch. I let it stay there on the floor for a whole day before I picked up the pieces. Funny how quickly something inside you just shuts off. I didn't tell Enid how bad it got. I didn't want to worry her. She'd done enough already. And besides, there was something almost comforting about the hurt. At least it matched the ache in my chest. I kept wondering, when did I start disappearing in his eyes? Was it when he got married? When the kids were born? Or had I always been invisible? A background figure in the Mitch Holloway story. I remembered a day, years ago. Mitch was in high school. I came home late from my shift at the diner, my feet swollen, my back screaming. He was sitting at the kitchen table, eating the last of the leftovers I'd made the night before. He didn't look up when I walked in. He just said, "Mom, we're out of milk." No hi. No, how was your day? Just a request. I smiled back then, like I always did. I'll pick some up tomorrow. But that moment came back to me now, sharp, cutting, one of 1,000 tiny moments where I gave, and he never thought to give back. 3 days after the Facebook photos, Cordelia showed up on my doorstep. She held a paper bag and looked more tired than I'd ever seen her. "Hi, Bertha," she said, eyes wide and cautious. "Can I come in?" I nodded and stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table, the one that had witnessed more heartbreak than meals lately. She pulled a small tin of tea from the bag. "It's from the Bahamas," she said softly. "They said it's good for joint pain. I thought maybe it'd help." I didn't touch it. "Did you know?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, I swear I didn't." I believed her. Cordelia had always been kind. Overwhelmed, yes, but decent. She looked at me now with real shame in her face. "Zoe found out first," she said quietly. "She saw the pictures and overheard me and Mitch arguing. He told me you offered him the money willingly, that it wasn't a big deal. And you believed him?" "I wanted to," she said honestly. "But then I saw your face in the pictures Zoe took at Flynn's birthday. You weren't smiling. Not really. You looked tired, hurt." I said nothing, just stared at the tin of tea on the table. "We'll pay you back," she added quickly. "Mitch is taking out a loan." I almost laughed. That man wouldn't take out a library book without someone begging him to. I didn't answer, and she didn't push. But as she stood up to leave, she said something that stuck with me. "Bertha, I want you to know, Zoe's watching all of this. She sees what's happening, and it's changing how she sees her father and how she sees you." That night, I sat up long after the sun went down. My hands throbbed. My heart felt hollow. But there was a flicker, a small one, of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope, not yet, but maybe awareness. Zoe was watching. The next generation. And maybe, just maybe, what I chose to do next mattered more than I realized. The following week, I started treatment. I had to pawn my mother's old jewelry to do it. A gold necklace with a small emerald, 2 rings, a silver bracelet I wore every Sunday to church. I cried in the pawn shop parking lot, not because of the money, but because I had planned to give those pieces to Zoe one day. Still, I walked into the clinic the next morning with my head high. The nurse smiled as she prepped the shot. "You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Holloway." "I hope so," I said, meaning it. The medication stung, going in. My muscles tensed, and for a moment I thought I might cry again. But then I pictured myself gardening, holding a spoon without pain, hugging Zoe tightly with both arms. I breathed through it. I survived it. I didn't hear from Mitch, not on treatment day, not the day after, not for the entire first week. But you know who did call? Zoe. She asked if she could come over after school. When she arrived, she kicked off her shoes at the door like she used to when she was 7 and ran into the kitchen like it was still her second home. "I brought you something," she said, digging into her backpack. It was a pack of soft yarn, pale lavender. "I thought maybe we could knit something together. You said your hands were feeling a little better?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded. And in that moment, in that small act of love from a girl barely old enough to drive, I felt something shift. I realized that while I had lost so much, my money, my trust, my illusions, I hadn't lost everything. Zoe was still here, and that mattered. I once believed a mother's love could fix anything, that if I kept giving, kept forgiving, something in Mitch would eventually soften. Maybe not overnight, but slowly, like how winter fades into spring, quiet and patient. But people don't always bloom just because you watered them. Sometimes they grow thorns. It was a Friday morning when I sat at my kitchen table, tea growing cold beside me, and finally said it out loud, to no one. "He doesn't deserve it." Not my voice shaking, not my hands aching, not my years of sacrifice, not my trust, and certainly not my name on a will that he'd only used to cash out what was left of me. That realization didn't come like a thunderclap. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, simple. It arrived the way pain does when you first wake up, familiar and undeniable. Later that afternoon, I pulled out a dusty manila folder from the drawer by the fridge. It had Talbot Cranston's business card paperclipped to the front. I hadn't seen him in years, but he helped me draw up my original will back when I still believed Mitch was the only person I'd ever want to leave anything to. Back then, I didn't even consider anyone else. He was my son, my only child. Who else could there be? Talbert's office hadn't changed, still smelled like old books and lemon polish. He greeted me like an old friend and ushered me in without asking questions. We sat down and I told him everything. Not just the money, Messon, but the words Mitch said. The way he brushed off my health. The vacation, the silence after, the tea Cordelia brought, Zoe's visits. He listened like the world's last good lawyer. Steady, serious, no interruptions. And when I finished, he simply said, "Do you want to update the will?" "I do," I replied. "I want to protect what little I have left, and I want it to mean something." We spent nearly 2 hours talking through the options, and I'll admit, a part of me felt guilty, even as I made the decisions, like I was turning my back on my own flesh and blood, but another part of me, the part that hadn't slept right in weeks, felt relief. We drafted the changes. My house would remain mine until I passed. Then it would be sold and the proceeds split. 70% to a trust fund for Zoe and Flynn, strictly for education, released only when they turned 25. 30% to a local nonprofit that helps elderly people who've been financially abused by their families. Mitch would receive nothing, not because I hated him, but because he'd already taken more than enough. After the paperwork was signed, Talbert walked me to the door. "Are you planning to tell him?" he asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe not." He nodded. Sometimes the quietest truths are the hardest to carry, but also the strongest. That evening, I sat on the porch with Enid. We watched the neighborhood kids ride bikes while the sky turned purple behind the trees. "I changed it," I told her. She didn't ask what it was. She knew. "How do you feel?" I paused. "Lighter, like I've been holding something heavy for too long and finally put it down." She sipped her iced tea and nodded. "You didn't stop being a mother, Bertha," she said. "You just stopped being a doormat." The next day, Zoe came over after school. We baked lemon cookies, the kind her grandpa used to love. I watched her hands mix the dough, her face soft in the golden kitchen light. At one point, she looked up and asked, "Grandma, did you ever want more kids?" I smiled, wiping flour from her cheek. "I thought about it, but Mitch was everything. I didn't think I needed more." She went quiet, then said softly, "Sometimes I wish you had." That one hit harder than I expected, but I didn't cry. I just nodded. Sometimes I do too. That night, I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. And I realized something else, something I hadn't been ready to admit until now. Mitch hadn't changed. He'd always been this way. I had just spent 40 years looking at him through the eyes of a mother who couldn't bear to see it. I remembered birthdays he forgot, calls he never returned, the time I sat alone in the ER and he texted hours later saying he was busy. One by one, the memories fell into place like puzzle pieces I'd tried to fit into the wrong picture. And in the silence of my bedroom, I said it again. Not angrily, not bitterly, just truthfully. He doesn't deserve it. I never imagined starting over at 68. Not in any big, flashy way. I didn't move to a new city. I didn't change my name. I didn't dye my hair some wild color and sign up for salsa classes. No, my kind of starting over happened in the smallest ways. The way I folded my sweaters again. The way I watered the geraniums on the porch. The way I picked up my knitting needles, stiff fingers and all, and tried to remember where I left off 10 years ago. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, because this wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about proving something to myself. The treatment was starting to work, slowly but surely. The swelling in my fingers had gone down. I could grip a spoon without wincing. I could walk a few blocks without needing to rest every 10 minutes. Dr. Radley smiled at my last appointment. "You're responding better than expected," she said. "Keep going." I left her office that day and sat on a park bench outside, watching a young mother chase after her toddler. I watched the way she laughed, the way the child squealed with joy, and I felt something warm stir in me. It wasn't envy, it was memory. I used to run like that. I used to laugh like that. I used to carry a boy named Mitch on my hip, bounce him on my knee, and think this is what forever feels like. Forever changes, doesn't it? But here's what surprised me. I didn't feel bitter anymore. I just felt aware, awake, present. Zoe kept coming by after school. She didn't make a big deal of it, just showed up with her backpack, sometimes with a bag of oranges or a new kind of tea she thought I'd like. She helped me organize the pantry one weekend. We laughed when we found 3 cans of expired peaches from 2017. She started calling this place her quiet house. I asked her what she meant, and she shrugged. "It's peaceful here," she said. "No yelling, no walking on eggshells." I didn't ask questions. I just let her stay as long as she wanted. Sometimes Flynn came too. He didn't say much at first, just sat at the table and played with his action figures while Zoe did homework. But he smiled more here. He slept easier. That meant more to me than I could say. I still hadn't heard from Mitch, and that was fine. Every day that passed without his voice in my ear, manipulating, excusing, justifying, felt like another stitch in the fabric of my healing. Enid stopped by often, always with something practical. Soup, bread, new kitchen towels. She fussed at me like a sister, or maybe like the kind of daughter I never had but would have loved. One morning, while clipping dead blooms off the rose bush in my front yard, I felt the sun on my face and realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for Mitch to apologize. Not for a phone call. Not even for justice. I had stopped waiting and started living. About 2 weeks after that, Zoe came into the kitchen holding her phone, looking nervous. "Grandma," she said, "can I ask you something kind of weird?" "Sure." She hesitated. "Is it okay if I change my last name?" I blinked. "Your last name?" She nodded. "I don't want to be a Holloway anymore. I don't want people to see me and think of him." She didn't have to explain who him was. "What name would you pick?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Yours," she said simply. "I want to be a Bertha. I mean, not literally, but you know what I mean." I laughed. I couldn't help it. Then I started crying, softly, quietly, not out of sadness, but because for the first time in so long I felt seen. Not as someone's mother, but as me. It's funny how healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a trumpet or a neon sign. It comes when you realize the tea stayed warm because you drank it slowly. When you reach for the doorknob and notice you're not afraid to open it anymore. When your granddaughter calls you the strongest woman I know, and you finally believe she might be right. One afternoon, I stood in front of my closet and pulled out a cardigan Mitch had bought me years ago. I held it in my hands for a moment, then folded it gently and placed it in the donation bag. I didn't hate it, but I didn't need to hold on to it anymore either. Some things, and people, are better left in the past. My garden was blooming again, not perfectly. Some petals were uneven, the soil still needed turning, but it was mine, and I had the strength to kneel beside it, to tend it, to grow something again. I turned 68 on a Saturday. The sun was gentle that morning, the kind of golden that softens everything it touches, even the parts of your life that still ache. Enid insisted on throwing a small party in the backyard. "Just the people who matter," she said. "Nothing fancy." So she brought over paper lanterns and lemonade, Orville fired up the grill, and Cordelia came with the kids and a chocolate cake that said, "To Grandma, stronger than ever." We sat under the apple tree, the branches low and full, the scent of flowers and charcoal in the air. Flynn ran around chasing butterflies, and Zoe helped me carry the lemonade pitcher, even though I told her I could manage. It was the first birthday in years where I didn't feel invisible. Later, as the sun was setting and the garden lit up with little fairy lights, I glanced toward the far edge of the yard. Just beyond the hedges, half hidden in the shade, stood a familiar figure. Mitch. He was standing still, arms crossed, watching. We locked eyes for a moment, long enough for me to see it. Regret, bitterness, maybe even sadness. But I didn't wave. I didn't nod. I didn't do anything. I just turned back to the table where Zoe was laughing at something Orville said, because that was where I belong now, among those who stayed. He didn't come closer, didn't shout. He just stood there for a minute longer, then turned and walked away. And with that, the last thread loosened. No screaming, no grand scene, just distance. Real, final distance. You see, the hardest part of betrayal isn't the act itself. It's the slow, aching realization that someone you would have walked through fire for wouldn't even light a match for you. But healing, real healing, doesn't come from revenge or confrontation. It comes when you choose not to chase after someone who turned their back on you. It comes when you look around your life and realize you were never alone. They just didn't see you. The following week, the garden bloomed brighter than ever. Zoe helped me plant lilies along the fence. Flynn painted rocks to line the path. Cordelia got the final divorce papers signed. And I filed the final version of my will. The house would go to the kids' education fund. The rest to help elderly people who, like me, had once trusted too much. It felt right, like setting something down gently after carrying it too long. One afternoon, while clipping lavender, Zoe asked, "Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" I thought about it. "No," I said softly, "not anymore." "Really?" I looked at her, this granddaughter who showed up when I needed someone the most. "If things hadn't gone the way they did," I said, "I might still be waiting for someone who was never going to show up. I might have missed all this." She smiled, and we went back to trimming. You know, for a long time, I thought my story had ended the day Mitch took my money. But I was wrong. That wasn't an ending. It was a beginning I didn't know I needed. And maybe that's why I'm sharing this now. Not because I want pity, but because somewhere out there, maybe you're sitting at your kitchen table wondering how everything got so quiet. Maybe you gave too much to someone who only took. Maybe you've spent years waiting for a phone call that never came. If that's you, I want you to know something. You're not weak for giving. You're strong for surviving. And you are allowed, completely allowed, but to start over, even if the only thing you change is the way you carry your own name. Before you go, can I ask you something? If you've ever felt forgotten by someone you raised or hurt by someone you gave everything to, would you share just one sentence about how you found your way back to yourself? Or if you're still in that quiet place, just let me know you're listening. Sometimes that's all it takes to remind someone. You are not alone. Thank you for being here. And thank you for staying through the silence.